I will come to you. I just was under the impression that a lot of people have very patiently been writing their questions down and passing them to volunteers. But maybe the volunteer took them away.
Are there any questions online as well?
Because we have in this way anonymized questions, I believe it should be all right to live stream the answers to the questions. Some people prefer not to be online without advance warning, and I can understand that. But for the anonymized questions that come to us in paper form, then we will live stream them onto the internet with your permission. Is there a letter that can be used to send to MPs that we can send? Thank you. Well, I really adore that question. Thank you very much. What is the most effective action we should get involved in to positively contribute to the human rights cause in Egypt? So I'm going to ask that question, and I'm going to hope that it will inspire you to ask far more questions, because we have the time tonight. We're not staying until 10:30, but just for your information, we have this room until 10:30. But no one is staying that long, certainly not myself, according to my 1-year-old.
Okay, so I think Dr. Monia, she talked about this a bit. So in terms of what actions can be taken and how can we help the Khaled situation or the situation in Egypt or any injustice actually all over the world. I think in Canada we take for granted a lot of the rights that we have here, and I really realized this when I was in Egypt for the last almost 10 months. So basically you could do letters, as Nadia mentioned. You can also speak to your MPs. I found that MPs have been very welcoming. They're welcoming to listen to the different issues that Canadians have. Awareness is a huge thing. I was also surprised to see that most Canadians do not know what's happening in Egypt, or know very little, or are very confused. So awareness is very important. And it's very easy to find out what's happening in Egypt, and let your friends know, let your neighbors know, let your colleagues know. Make sure that people at least know what's going on, these huge injustices that are happening. People have to know about them, and to speak to their members of parliament, to speak to anyone that they have access to speak to human rights organizations, whatever, anything little that can help, I think is useful. And I guess if Dr. Monia has something to add to that as well.
Are human rights organizations on the ground in Egypt being allowed to function? And if so, are they taking action on this case?
I can't really speak to all human rights organizations. There are some local human rights organizations in Egypt. But what you have to realize right now in Egypt is, since the military coup, Egypt has been run with fear. Like, it's been run by fear. Basic freedoms, freedom of expression. You saw the example of the journalists. Freedom to protest. Freedom to, we just had a rally in Toronto on Saturday. So while I was walking through that rally, and there was actually police officers there that were helping us with our march, they were securing the path, they were protecting us. I couldn't help but reflect on Egypt, and remember that if we were in Egypt during that same march, we would have had gas, rubber bullets, live ammunition, arrests, all sorts of things that have been happening daily in Egypt. So, people haven't been able to do much in Egypt on the ground. So I can't speak to all the human rights organizations. The human rights organizations that I did contact while I was in Cairo, when I spent the last 9 months there, I was frantically trying to speak to anyone that could help. Most of them were the international organizations. I spoke to Red Cross, I spoke to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, a number of others. They've all been quite supportive, but the problem is that I usually used to get a common answer of, we cannot do anything right now because the military regime is not allowing any kind of work on the ground. So that was my personal experience, but I can't speak on a more formal level.
Well, I think it's difficult for any organization working on the ground there to put any pressure on the government. I think the government needs the pressure that is efficient and can have an impact on the case of Al-Qazzaz, but also of the case of the journalist Fahmy, I think should come from Canada. It is very difficult over there to speak out. plus there are, I mean, as of today, 700 people are going to be apparently, executed. So whoever, like the priorities over there for the human rights organization, they are swamped by all these requests from the families. So it will be really, out of thinking that they are going to deal with cases. Plus, they know that these are maybe, Canadian citizen or related, so they are not going to be as really scared as for the others who do not have any connection. So I think it's very important again to put the pressure from Canada. Canada has a role to play. It is playing already a role in the world. However, they are not playing enough role in Egypt, in the Middle East, and it is time to send a strong message to the government, Stephen Harper, to tell him that there are people who are in jails. There are people who are in solitary confinement. So maybe they know that, but they need to be reminded it every day. And then when the pressure becomes so unbearable, they are going to speak out to their counterpart, and the counterpart are going to act. But if there is nothing from here, then we shouldn't expect that the Egyptians are going to to act. It's the last of their worries, unfortunately.
Our next question, can you tell us about the conditions of Torah you touched on of the families? Have you witnessed other human rights violations? I think that's a question for Sarah.
My personal situation, like I said, Khaled has been kept in solitary confinement. He spent the first 21 days not leaving his cell. Till today, he's in 23-hour lockdown, sometimes longer. This last week, he spent 70 hours in his cell. It's about 37 degrees right now in Cairo. It's very hot, very little ventilation, very minimal food, unhygienic food, no medicine. Then the list goes on. No pens and papers, no way to tell time. And that was my personal experience. From the stories that I've heard in the lineups in Torah, and just from people that I've made friends with and other families, and I think a lot of the human rights organizations have actually documented this. I personally have seen children in prison. When I've been visiting the prison, I've seen young boys that are very evidently children. I've seen older men in wheelchairs in prisons. I have several friends, female friends, who have been arrested with no charge. So women, children, elderly, Islamists, non-Islamists, everyone in every segment of Egyptian society have been really touched by this oppression. And the list goes on. There's been a lot of documented cases of torture in the police stations, torture in the security facilities, torture in the military camps and in the prisons. I just met John Grayson over the weekend, and he accounted to us his story of torture. He's a Canadian, one of the 2 Canadians that were held before and released after 51 days. The prison conditions are quite horrible, to say the least. I have tried very hard to get human rights organizations to visit the prisons, and yet to be able to get the Egyptian authorities to agree to that. And this is one of the things I continue to try to do. And I think the world needs to know about what's going on in Egypt.
Sorry, I have a question. Was journalist Fahmy visited by Consular? Do you know if he was visited here?
So I've been in touch with the embassy in Egypt, and I have to mention that on a personal level, the ambassador and different embassy staff have been very supportive on a personal level, but there's very little that they could do in my situation because the Egyptians are very not accepting of their interference. Mohammed Fahmy spent about a month in the same cell block as Khaled. When he was first arrested, he was sent to the Scorpion prison as well, and they became friends by talking through the windows in their cells. So I got to meet his family through that. So Mohammed Fahmy was put in a lot of the similar conditions, but I think because of a lot of the pressure that happened internationally, and the embassy did help to secure that he was moved to a better part of the prison. I believe that the embassy is in contact with his family, and they do visit him in the prison, and they do provide consular services if he's a Canadian. And this is another thing I forgot to mention in my talk, that I really am asking the Canadian government to urge or to demand pressure the Egyptian military regime that Khaled has to be released. And in the meantime, until his release happens, he needs to be moved to a better facility. He needs the human rights violations, basic human dignity, that's all I'm asking for.
This may be a question to both of you. How important is social media in not only creating awareness, but getting the attention of government officials? There's a little note of thanks here at the bottom.
I think we can all speak to this, and I think those who followed the Arab Spring in the beginning and the revolution know that social media plays a huge role. And I think even with our campaign, we can speak to that a little bit, that social media is playing a large role in just generating awareness. And people do pay attention to that, media pays attention to that, and I think that's helping a lot. So people should be helping, like we spoke of some of the ways that people can take action. Social media is another way of spreading awareness very quickly, and helping any cause that requires help, any injustices.
I'm a bit old school, so